begun when dark clouds covered Europe's horizons as the National Socialists gained ever more power, soon to annex Austria to the German Reich in the Anschluss of 1938, paving the way for World War II. Thankfully, by that time, the Oestreichs were already settled in New Jersey and New York, soon to be joined by the rest of Edith's family, her mother, sister, and brother, sponsored by Mitchell's family. Ellen was born in Brooklyn, New York, 1939, to be followed by his sister Janet in 1942 into a warm, nurturing home environment, surrounded by a large extended family. Friday nights often welcomed friends, enjoying Edith's Viennese cooking while socializing, playing music. Various family members played piano, mandolin, and flute, an enviable home to grow up in. Ellen's birth in 1939 coincided with the outbreak of World War II. His father, Major Mitchell Oestreich, was assigned to join the war effort a few years later, serving in the 15th General Hospital as Chief of Services in England, Belgium, and France from 1943 to 1945. His field X-ray setup gained him the admiration of his commanders. At one point, Mitchell left the hospital to indulge in a game of tennis, which had inadvertently saved his life. When he got back, the hospital had been bombed and his colleague was dead. It was in this setting that he met up with the renowned Dr. Ben Felsen, who later became the professor and director of radiology at the University of Cincinnati for 50 years. At some point, Dr. Felsen visited the Oestreichs, now in Buffalo, taking pleasure in bouncing Ellen on his knee. It appears that Ellen was enveloped in the aura of X-rays from his cradle days onward. His radiology career was predestined. Following the war years, the Oestreichs eventually opened their successful radiology private practice in Buffalo, New York, enjoying many years of a fulfilling career. Ellen's school years at Nichols School in Buffalo were characterized by his thirst for learning and his need to satisfy his curiosity. Nichols provided an excellent and dedicated faculty, which Ellen appreciated for the rest of his life. It was a private, then all-boys school, founded in 1892. In addition to the excellent academic programs, Ellen developed close friendships with many of his loyal classmates throughout his life. Until recently, their group met on Zoom on a regular monthly basis. Reunions at Nichols throughout the years were a highlight Ellen always looked forward to. On learning of Ellen's passing, one of his Nichols classmates recently wrote me, "Ellen E. Oestreich, highest honors. I never knew what the E stood for until now that he's gone. It should have stood for, quote, excellence in all respects. The awards kept coming in 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grades and on. He was my good friend," says this particular person. "Throughout the years, we were classmates. I never forgot his warm friendship and his family's hospitality on snowy weekends when it was hard for me to get to my home on the lake shore, where snow piled up 3 to 4 feet regularly. Ellen's charming mother, Edith, welcomed me to their Friday table and treated me like family." The Nichols yearbook, The Verdian, in 1957, Ellen's senior year, describes him, quote, "As a consistent and enthusiastic contributor to class and school, his name has come to be synonymous with both intellectual curiosity and highest honors. The Dramatics Club and Assemblies Committee have given Ellen the opportunity to provide both amusing and provocative entertainment for the school. Devoted to all aspects of literary enterprise, Allen has worked tirelessly on all three Nichols publications. Enthusiasm for athletics accounts for his spirited track workouts, yet bowling was his favorite diversion. An aversion to intellectual stagnancy and his sincere enthusiasm for offbeat causes will make Allen stand out on the Princeton campus, as it did. 8 students from his senior class at Nichols were accepted at Princeton, unprecedented in the history of both institutions. Allen went to Princeton majoring in mathematics and graduating with honors in 1961. His senior thesis on Markovian operators dealt with the theory of probability and its application to medical decision-making. His path to a career in medicine was long since determined. He was accepted at Johns Hopkins Medical School in 1961 and earned his MD degree in 1965, followed by his residency at Strong Memorial Hospital in Rochester, New York. I will now share with you a few little-known facts about Allen. One of Allen's proudest moments in life was August 28, 1963, when he was there at the March on Washington, as Dr. Martin Luther King gave his iconic speech, "I Have a Dream." In his elementary school years and his high school years, he developed a keen interest in creative writing and poetry, which he retained throughout his life. For several years, he attended a poetry reading club at the Mercantile Library, downtown Cincinnati. During college, he had a correspondence with the poet Allen Ginsberg. In 7th grade, at the age of 12, he took an interest in Afghan history and asked to be taken to the Afghan embassy in Washington, D.C., to enable him to access information about that country. At the time, it was governed by King Muhammad Zahir Shah, who was the last king of Afghanistan, and actually its last decent ruler, reigning from 1933 until he was deposed in 1973. The information that Allen got provided material for an excellent essay for Allen's history class and retained his interest in that country for the rest of his life. In 1970, while Allen was serving in the U.S. Army Hospital in Fort Polk, Louisiana, he put in a request to, quote, Medico, a service of care based in Washington, D.C., that provided training for radiology residents in Kabul, Afghanistan. Unfortunately, all slots were already full, and the excursion was deemed not advisable for radiologists at that time. In the late 1980s, Allen had yet another encounter with Afghanistan. This time it was an Afghan refugee in Cincinnati who had graduated with an MD degree from Kabul, but who was unable to practice in this country. Allen arranged a residency program for him, which enabled him to eventually succeed as a pediatrician in California. He's listed in this write-up as a co-author with Allen of the periphysis and its effects on the metaphysis. Since childhood, Allen has amassed an impressive stamp collection, including an almost complete collection of Afghan stamps from its beginnings in 1870 until the end of official issuing in 2009, offering a glimpse into that fascinating history of that troubled country. In 2018, Allen and I had traveled to Uzbekistan, which just a couple of years before had shed its communist ideology and become open to the West. We were a mere 40 miles from the border with Afghanistan, but alas, given the Taliban regime, it would not have been a very wise choice. I would think that the majority of Ellen's working hours were spent reading, and I mean real books. He had great pleasure in collecting books by certain publishers, such as the Modern Library series, first published by Boney and Liveright in New York City in 1917, and later continued by Random House. On every family vacation or out-of-town antique hopping excursions, we would always stop off at bookstores and search for the distinctive, comfortably sized books bearing the logo of the running man carrying a lighted torch. At the end of the day, our car would resemble a bookmobile. As a youngster, Ellen collected comic books, which became quite valuable in later years. On occasion, Ellen would go to comic book conventions for trading purposes, both buying and selling. His most recent collectible was Moxie memorabilia. Moxie was a somewhat bitter concoction of a gentian root extract with some 20 flavorings, once the nation's #1 soft drink, rivaling Coca-Cola. The soft drink was once enjoyed by millions in the late 1800s and is still available today in the Northeast, especially in Maine, but I'm hearing in several other places in the country, but not in Cincinnati. Allen was a very enthusiastic folk dancer in his younger years, with several performances on various campuses. He particularly enjoyed Hungarian, Romanian, Greek, and Israeli folk dances, attending regular classes and rehearsals. He also took beginning ballet classes and was an enthusiastic jazzerciser for many years. The Oestreich family produced 7 medical doctors. Doctors Edith and Mitchell, Ellen's parents, both radiologists. Dr. Janet Bernstein, Ellen's sister, a psychiatrist. Dr. Ellen Oestreich, pediatric radiologist. Dr. Ann Liebling, Ellen's cousin, rheumatologist. Dr. Walter Liebling, Ellen's uncle, general practitioner. Dr. Peter Liebling, Ellen's second cousin, a pulmonologist. Some people called him Dr. Oestreich, others Dr. O. For some, he was Bone Man, a reference to his specialty of bone radiology. And sometimes, when a brilliant diagnosis was made, they said, the O strikes again. Ellen was a highly accomplished professional in a multifaceted persona, but above all, a gentle, modest, and compassionate individual. He reflected his parents' fine qualities along with his excellent education and his disciplined work ethic, his professional standards, his quick thinking, subtle, sometimes wacky wit and humor, and his original creative thought and writing. Ellen was a devoted, generous, and loving husband to me, as well as a caring and loving father to our son, Mike. I consider myself very fortunate to have shared 50 extraordinary years with Ellen on a journey like no other. To conclude, I would like to share a poem with you entitled Wishes. Did you ever make a wish? If so, was it wise or foolish? Did it come true or didn't it? Was it for a doll or for a baseball mitt? A trip to the circus or a bright table? Or anything that was able? A foolish wish is for a lot of money. A trip to Mars, 1,000 jars of honey. A wise wish is for a house, a baby child, or to get rid of every mouse. But there's one wish better than the rest, and that is for happiness. This was written by Ellen at the age of 10. To conclude, I wish to thank Dr. Brian Coley for arranging this event and making it so special for me and Alan's family. Thank yous go to so many of you, especially Dr. Courtney Jones, who took such loving care of Alan and me. Dr. Alex Smitke and my neighbor, George Schober, and so many of you who chauffeured me around. Thank you.
Thank you, Tamar. Give me just 1 second, if you would, please. There might be some people online who are trying to get in. I just want to make sure. Okay. Looks like we're good. All right. I'm going to take over just a bit. Many of you have seen a lot of these slides that they've been scrolling through, so I'll go through them a little bit quickly. But Tamar, I expect you. I said I was going to do this, but you hold that. In case you have things to add, I know I promised her she wouldn't have to deal with technology. So okay, so but that's going to be the extent of it. Is the microphone in case, because I think it's clear you will have details that I do not. So and I've already forgotten the name of one person on the slide, and it's not coming back. So all right, so talk about Dr. Oestreich a little bit. So we talked about being born in Brooklyn. I believe that was during the time when his parents were doing their residency training. When they came back from Vienna, they were in New York. And so I love the picture, these pictures of Alan with a cat and parking him outside on probably a very warm day, so he'd stay out of trouble in the tub there. So, and then just again, as Tamar alluded to, so they met over in Vienna, which was really sort of one of the meccas. That's a very mixed metaphor, isn't it? So you know, one of the best places you could do your medical training, you know, during the day. And so you can see that's their announcement back in December of 1935. And then squirreled away on Alan's shelves in his office was that I thought that might be his placard, Lieutenant Colonel. But then in looking through, it's like, no, he never made Lieutenant Colonel. So that's actually his father's desk placard from, I presume, when he was overseas in Belgium running the hospital. So that's a very interesting thing to find. And that's a picture of Mitch. And actually, Alan wrote his obituary, which appeared in the journal Radiology, one of our premier journals, back in 1983. A very dapper individual. And so, as Tamar, I don't think she minded. It's like, Alan, what happened? Okay, so it's like, my God, look good. He was very sharp. Pictures of him in a long tie and not a bow tie either. So also unique, but man, the hats, the whole double-breasted thing is really impressive. It's really impressive. So, and then this is Camp Arrowhead, right, where he was, yeah, please, where he was a counselor and a longtime attendee, and so just, you know, fun pictures, especially for those of us that really only knew Alan, you know, the professional side of Alan. I mean, he was very gregarious, but he was a private person. And so, you know, I love hearing about Alan, you know, doing bowling and, you know, an exuberant track, you know, practice. It's like, these are things that I don't have in my head that Alan will be involved with. So, so it's really fun to see these from his past. And then, as Tamar said, the Nichols School, again, not a bow tie, but I assume that was probably Nichols School. You had to wear this because in those days, everyone wore a jacket and tie, even to middle school. And so you can see down at the bottom, you know, lots of honors, very, very active. And then off to Princeton. He was a very proud 1961 Princeton grad. Judging, you already heard about how much he stayed in touch with his Nichols friends. Judging by just looking at his wall, he went to a great many Princeton reunions, because all the reunion photos of everybody is up on his wall. His main coffee cup on his desk, it's a Princeton coffee cup from the 35th reunion. So a very proud graduate of that. And then off to Johns Hopkins Medical School. And I hope he had a good time there. There was precious little Johns Hopkins memorabilia in Alan's collection. So I'm sure they trained him well, but I don't know if he retained a lot of fond memories from his time at Hopkins. So, but at any rate, so a phenomenally well-trained individual through his time. And then after that, he went to Rochester, to University of Rochester and Strong Memorial Hospital. And this is what it looked like about the time he was there. And this is the name I forget, Tamar. He was the chairman of the department.
Dr. Stanley Rogoff.
Stanley Rogoff. And so he was the department chairman, and apparently was a very big influence on Alan going into radiology and a positive role model. But it's also where he met Dr. Lionel Young, who became, really a mentor and a lifelong friend. They were very close, and you'll see some more about Lionel, here in a little bit. But he was a tremendous influence. For those who don't know Lionel is a pediatric radiologist, was here briefly, did some training here. In his last position, he was the chair of radiology at Loma Linda Hospital, and one of the kinder individuals, in our field, which is full of pretty nice people in general. So, so he was great, and also comes from a very radiology-centric family. His daughter Tina is the new chair at Boston Children's Hospital in radiology. So, and then he went to Fort Polk. It's like, oh my God, Alan in the swamps of Louisiana, and so. I didn't find a lot of memorabilia about this time of life either. So, but I'm sure you've heard about sort of Alan's social proclivities and desire for fairness and justice, and so it probably drove him crazy that I can't remember Polk's first name, but he was I believe Tennessee. He was an Episcopalian bishop that became a Civil War general, and apparently was a very brutal Civil War general, and so. In the renaming that has gone on recently, it is now Fort Johnson, which would probably, I don't know if Alan knew that or not, but Henry Johnson was a World War I African-American soldier, much heroism, and as you might imagine, not recognized until 2015 when he was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor by President Obama. So I think Alan would have appreciated the name change at the fort that he was stationed in. And then off to Columbia, Missouri. Also, not a place I would picture Alan. And what I haven't asked Tamar, this is where I met Tamar. It's like, what were you doing in Columbia, Missouri? So school. Okay, so maybe we can discuss this later. But that's where they met. That's where they met in '73. And so the old hospital is pretty distinguished from the new hospital, but that old hospital would have been where Alan was doing his initial faculty work. Then he came to Cincinnati Children's, and he was recruited by Scott Dunbar, who you see there, and probably also influenced, and I didn't add this in, Tamar, but Alan, as we'll talk about a little bit, was very much an expert in child abuse and the imaging of child abuse, and very active in the child abuse team here, which is a wonderful team. And Fred Silverman did a lot of the initial work with that, and Fred was the chair right before Scott Dunbar was. And Fred was here from 47 to 75, and I know was greatly influenced. So the institution already had some cachet. When Alan came here, that was the very waning days of this version of the hospital, which is actually not far from where we're sitting now, where it was originally built. And it was originally built in '26. So he saw the very end of that. And then his career spanned to the very large campus, as many of you have figured out, wandering your way through the halls trying to get here. There is no short path to anything at the institution anymore. And so really almost every building you see there is part of Cincinnati Children's right now. So he saw tremendous change going through there. And he managed to go through a lot of chairs as well. And so after Dunbar, we had Dr. Kirks. I don't think that was Alan's favorites, but Dr. Strife, who and Janet was my chair when I was a fellow here, and then Dr. Donnelly, who's online, and Lane and I were co-fellows together. And then when Lane left to pursue other challenges, Alan got me, and so he has seen a lot of changes through the chairs over the years. And Alan was a teacher. That was his thing. He loved to teach. He loved to teach. Whether it was, at the View Box in the old days, pre-PACS, that was really his thing. That's what he loved to do. He loved to impart knowledge. He liked to teach. He gave many lectures, many places, and we'll show some of that. But he really liked the one-on-one teaching. Even until very, very recently, he would still teach the third year and the fourth year med students. He would still host some of the rheumatology folks. And he really liked that small group, one-on-one kind of teaching, and that's where he really thrived. The picture on the right, one of his sort of notorieties, if some of you are aware of the ingestion of rare earth magnets, can be very damaging to the intestines. We won't go into that. But Alan really made, while those papers were coming out, they really weren't getting a whole lot of press or attention. He really thought they did. And so he really made an effort to do that. And I believe this is from the New York Times. Is that right? Yeah, this is from the New York Times, where he's going through a particularly aggressive magnet swallower here, as you can see, of all those little white dots. But how many? 35. 35 magnets. All right, very good. So, so again, Alan teaching, whether it was one-on-one, whether it was in a lecture hall like this, or whether it was to the mass media, that was very important in the educational role. And that was recognized. Yes, he has many awards over the years, so we're not going to go through all of those. So, but this was a big one. This is the Singleton-Tabey Award by the Society of Pediatric Radiology. And the nice thing about this is that this one is sponsored by your trainees. Your trainees, have to basically put together a dossier about why you should have this award. And so Alan was a pretty easy choice. But again, it was just a recognition, not just from the smaller community. And as we'll see, he was so active in Europe, which is invisible to most of us and very well respected over there. And probably less known, quite honestly, in this country, except for his trainees. And so they got together and managed to make sure that Alan got this award. And then this one, Tamar alluded to this earlier. And so Alan was very much involved with the Meyerson Center for Safe and Healthy Children. And that's our child abuse team. And it is one of the finest in the country. It truly is. And so Alan, is also Meg Correa, his colleague in child abuse imaging, are an integral part of that team. And I know Bob Shapiro was hoping he could be here today. Bob's the leader of that. He had some other family commitments, but they really lean on Alan, very much so, for the interpretation of skeletal trauma, how to date it, whether, what's the likelihood it's due to non-accidental trauma. And so he was a very integral part of that team. So I was very happy that he was part of this clinical care team award that the hospital, the faculty affairs office does every year. And Alan was recognized as being an integral component of that team. So that was a lovely honor for him. So like I said, he lectured a lot of places. And so the little dots don't all add up, but 111 cities, and I think it was 27 countries throughout the course of his career. Of course, he visited a lot of places more than once. But really just all over this country, a little bit down in South America, and especially in Europe. And there weren't many summers you weren't over in Europe, I don't think, Tamar. So he was a regular at the ESPR, as you'll see in a minute. But an impressive array of places, both large meetings, again, as well as visits to small hospitals, where I'm sure he had the more intimate, one-on-one or 6-on-1 sort of teaching sessions that I think he loved and really thrived on. Another recognition, when he sort of, quote, retired, whether it was the first time or the second time, I'm not sure which, and he was in the office, the week before he passed away, so he's never totally retired. But in recognition of all he gave to the institution over the years and his teaching, our musculoskeletal reading room is named for him. And this plaque's in storage because we're in construction right now, but when probably about 6 months, the new final place will be there, and this plaque will go back up on the wall in honor of Alan's memory. So a couple of his papers. I mean, he wrote a lot of things, and this will probably come as no surprise to anybody. It was an eclectic set of topics, and so many modern academias say, you must focus on this one thing. It's like, no, Alan pursued whatever caught his eye or what he thought was important. But these were just a couple that I think are very important. And this was, and Tamar alluded to this, and I guess this is his Afghan colleague, yeah? So, which was news to me, but very detailed examination of the appearance and growth of the immature skeleton. Because a lot of people were confusing this bone bark, as Alan always called it, for non-accidental trauma and metaphyseal corner fractures. And so Alan really understanding with his colleagues, and Dr. Crawford's in the audience too, how the immature skeleton grows and what its radiographic manifestations are. He gave a lot to imaging about that, educated a lot of radiologists, and did some very fundamental things that we now take for granted. The anteater nose sign with Dr. Crawford as well. It's like, okay, I grew up, I learned about this. Yes, this was a thing. And it's like, oh, that was Dr. Oestrich. And Bill Mize is another pediatric radiologist. He's the chair of pediatric radiology up at Minneapolis Children's. I believe he was a resident. He was a resident at UC. So the time of this paper, he would have been Bill was a year before me in fellowship here. So the anteater nose, and I think the arrows in the Google picture make it pretty clear, but this is a sign of coalition or an abnormal, a congenital osseous fusion of two bones in this particular sign. And so, yeah, I grew up learning that in residency, and who knew? That was thanks to Alan's. And I assume he came up with that name. That feels like an Oestreichian sort of thing. Yes, that's what he would think of. Yeah, that feels very on brand for Alan. So, and Tamar alluded to, he was a mathematics major at Princeton, and so there's his first paper from his CV, and I couldn't find a copy of that. But it was math and medicine, and then his second paper looking at conditional probabilities, and that got into his interest in Markov chains and really using mathematics as a predictive tool for diagnosis. You start one place, and if this is true, you're here, and if that was true, then it's more likely this will be true. And so some really interesting early work. And then when he was at Missouri, you can see there the computers in Aiden daily practice of pediatric radiology. He was using, I can't imagine what version of computer, but they had a computer and they would keep track of different cases and they would do automatic calculations. And he talked about making workflow easier. And I can see Alex and Dr. Johnson, Alan maybe rebelled against technology a little bit later in years, but he was this incredible early proponent of computers in medicine. And Neil, you need to be quiet. So because they we'll come to that. We'll come to that. But this was fascinating looking into stuff, and I think Andrew Trout, one of our current faculty mentors, found this through Google Books. And so this was a 1972 publication of a 1970 symposium, again when he was at Missouri. And this is the automatic interpretation of pediatric bone age films, computer image analysis, statistical evaluation. Now, for those of you who are in the radiology field, okay, this is 50 years ago. He was looking at what now would be machine learning, artificial intelligence to automatically determine bone ages. And it's a really short paper, got a copy, happen to share. But this is the equipment Alan was using. This was the machine. And so the thing on the left would scan these little pictures, and then, but the things in his paper about what we're putting into it and how we're making the determination, it's just like the algorithms now. It was just 50 years ago. He was thinking about doing this kind of thing, which I find remarkable and incredibly prescient for what those of us that are in the medical field are looking at on a daily basis. He was also very big in ultrasound, and Dr. Babcock, who really was one of the founders of pediatric imaging. Alan had his period of time. He was very much involved with Diane, really in some of the very fundamental early work. And again, for those of you who may not be in medicine, this was, when was this paper, Diane? 1984, okay? And I will just tell you that to believe that this could be a thing, you had to have a religious faith. Because if you compared it to what imaging looks like now, I mean, you would say, no, this is a hopeless technology. We're never going to do anything with this. But Alan and Diane and other colleagues recognized that power and really did some very early fundamental work on the importance of ultrasound in pediatric diagnosis. And he had some musculoskeletal applications too. This is another paper with Dr. Babcock looking at a very common diagnosis, fibromatosis coli. And again, some of the very early imaging of what we take is, well, of course you get an ultrasound for fibromatosis coli. That's what one does. But back in this particular time, that was not a given. And so again, Dr. Babcock, along with Dr. Oestrich, really sort of defined that work and changed the way that people practiced. And he wrote many other things. He had an interest in history. And so he has, again, whatever caught his fancy. So this particular one about the fluoroscope. This was a very interesting paper. It used to be common. There was status thematicus. Am I getting that right? Am I right there, Alan? Is that the right term? It was thought that some asthma or what was probably bronchiolitis was due to an overly enlarged thymus. And so if you irradiate a thymus, it shrinks down, okay? And that's really frowned upon these days, but at the time, that was a fairly common pediatric practice. And so if you were short of breath and your x-ray showed a large thymus, which is almost assuredly normal for those children, you would radiate it and it would shrink down, and they started breathing better because all they had was a viral illness and they were going to breathe better in a week anyway, and you really didn't need to radiate them. But so again, interesting history of the use of radiology or radiation in the treatment of pediatric diseases. And then And he was very interested, and as you heard Tamar said, he was very interested in social justice and the importance of underrepresented minorities and representation in pediatric imaging, as well as all of medicine. And he was very much involved with the National Medical Association. And this picture's along with it again. I think that's not a bow tie. So that's I think my last picture of him without a bow tie. But this is a very important topic for him. And this was one of his, 1995 was the 100 years of the discovery of X-ray. So a lot of these things were coming out. And so this is an introduction or a paper he did in radiographics. And Tamar helped me with the history, make sure I get this right. So this was among the first, the AMA used to not allow African Americans into their roles. And you could not be a member of the major radiology societies unless you had a membership in another national medical association. And since the AMA was closed to African Americans, the National Medical Association was born. And so that was one reason why Alan would never join the AMA. But he joined the National Medical Association, was for years the only Caucasian member of that group, was very much involved in the radiology section, and actually was the chair of the radiology section for a period of a couple of years, whatever the standard term is. And so this was a very important thing for him. And this is a fascinating book. And I will tell you a little bit about it in a second, but sorry, that's the book. So he also wrote this and published this. And this is one of the few, and still one of the very few, compilations of African-American contributions to radiology in the country. And Alan did this in 1995 and is published by the NMA. And this is one of the first books I ever bought from Alan, and we'll get to that story in a second. So, but a very important work, and it's on display in the library if you want to look at it. It's a good thing. You already heard. I didn't know about this until a couple days ago, but you know, that's certainly impressive. And so again, Alan was clearly raised with a strong sense of justice and what is right, and wasn't afraid to fight for that as well, to represent himself. So I got to see this upstairs last night. That was pretty impressive. It was pretty impressive. And so he wrote his book on history, and he also wrote a lot of other books. So this is he and Meg, again, one of our current neuroradiologists. This is one of his most recent books about, again, looking at child abuse radiology. And he has a host of others, and as you might imagine, in many different languages. So he's had his books translated into German, I think probably Hungarian. I know Italian. There's one out in the hall from out in the library in Italian. But again, a prolific writer, and again, pretty practical books. It was about educating people to do better. He really felt that people, for all the interesting advanced equipment, advanced technology we image kids with now, 70% of what we do are still plain old X-rays. And so getting really good at plain old X-rays is still very, very much important. And so a lot of his education, his book was really focusing on that sort of stuff. May not be the sexy stuff anymore in the current era, but it's still vitally important in how you take care of kids. Another couple of books from him. You know, this was some were translated. This Imaging Anatomy of the Newborn is a beautiful book. And then a book that he put together with Dr. Crawford, this Atlas of Pediatric Orthopedic Radiology, also a very interesting book. And again, very valuable, no matter what your specialty is, if you're dealing with children. So that's sort of the CV overview. Okay, so I love this picture. Okay, I just, you know, so Mike, when he got into town, was able to digitize some and came in. And so again, this is a side of Alan most of us never saw. I mean, I never did. And I think all of us who've been a parent or a grandparent, you know, this is shortly after your birth, you know, just this very personal, tender moment, thinking also, if I were thinking, it's like, what have I done? So, you know, you know, I have to now take care of this thing, you know, so, but it looks like Alan's up to the task there. So it's just I love the heart in that picture. And I love the hair in this picture. Okay, so you know, this is great. So again, Alan went to the ESPR, the European SPR, I think almost every year. And so this is him in 1976. And so I have sort of a series of pictures as Alan travels through time. This is with Ken Fellows, who was the chair at CHOP for quite a while. And some of you may recognize Dr. Shields, who was a fellow here and who was my chair when I was up at Nationwide, and unfortunately passed away in 2015. But here's Alan being gregarious, and again, characteristic bow tie now. Here is Alan and Tamar and Mike in Budapest out on a carriage ride. This is with Lionel and Florence Young. I don't know exactly which event this is, but again, at a social event with his longtime mentor and friend, Lionel. In the doorway in Jerusalem with some other European colleagues. In bow tie on the stage at Genoa, the pediatric radiology with, again, he had so many European colleagues and I think was almost better known and respected in Europe than he was even in the United States. Very social at department gatherings. So I can't remember whose retirement this was, but you could always count on Dr. Oestreich to be there at the buffet line. Appropriate and, you know, an integral part of the department. So on the left here he is with Corning Benton and the right with Mike Gelfand. So these were some of the people who really founded the department, did some very important early work in their respective fields and really helped build the department and the institution to what it was. So Alan was very much a part of that group. And he kind of liked to dance, you know, so that was good. And so I can't remember whose party this was at, but yes, he liked to dance. Sometimes he really liked to dance. And so I'm just going to pause a moment on this slide here. Okay, so I'm going to have a sip of Moxie because that seems appropriate because I think he's displaying his Moxie here. So. Oh my, Alan. And of course, Tamar is always there, and Tamar has always been there. And they are quite the couple. They're quite the couple. And there's some beautiful pictures. They're traveling at St. Mark's Square, not underwater, and that's nice. And I love that picture. You know, I think that sums up a whole lot about what they are about. That one's pretty good too. So I think he has that kind of same sort of look he had for Mike back in 1983. I think he's always had that look for Tamar. So that's that stuff. And here's what Brian took away from Dr. Oestreich and some of my experiences. So you recognize this. Yeah, this was one of his things. You know, he had a few things that he always imparted. And so the lamina dura, first of all, I'm sorry, Dr. Cook, who looks at teeth? I mean, come on. No, forget it. But the lamina dura is that little thin line, and there are certain diseases, the differential diagnosis of which is there on the bottom left, that if you miss the lamina dura, you should think about that. And round. I don't know what's happening online. Someone will text me. We're going to keep going, though. If that disappears, think about things like leukemia, think about histiocytosis. So that was a thing. And so now when I look at a jaw film, it's like, yeah, I look at the lamina dura to see if it's still there. And that's because of Alan. It says, thou shalt look for the lamina dura. The plain film findings of joint effusion. And so this is interesting because the last month in our interesting case conferences, a lot of people have been like, oh, you can't tell, plain films are worthless. And it's like, well, you know, they're really not if you know what to look for. And so I've had a couple of really great calls in the last month because Alan taught me what to look for. And so the distension of joint capsules, sometimes the obturator internus is removed. And this is ultrasound, which is what we typically diagnose. This is normal. This is the fluid in the hip. And so, again, back to Alan's philosophy, if you really know what you're looking at a plain film, you can get a lot of good out of that. You can do a lot of stuff. And so, again, whenever I look at a pelvis radiograph and it's somebody with hip pain, I always look for those things that Alan taught me to look for. Every once in a while, I do pretty good. So this is another pelvic radiograph, and the radiologist might look at those iliac crests, and those are Mickey Mouse ears. Okay, they're kind of big like that. Okay, I think you can see that. And that is very, very typical of a pelvis of a child with Down syndrome. Now, typically, of course, you know, clinicians don't need help with you telling them their patient has Down syndrome. But my one anecdote for this is when I was up in Columbus, I had a very good ER friend, and it's like 2 a.m, and they were getting hammered. And there was a 12-year-old boy who had very, very high fevers, and my attending friend, different era, wasn't even necessarily going to see the patients because, you know, it was viral season. Everyone's got a fever. And I put in my dictation, you know, bony findings typical of Down syndrome. And he called me up because when he read the report, it was like Down syndrome and fever, because Down syndrome kids are prone to get leukemia. And because of that, he actually got a blood test and the kid had leukemia. And he said, I was going to send the kid home. Now, yes, the child would have come back, but don't know what kind of shape the child would have come back in. And so, again, I think about that anytime I see, Down's kid when they come through, that for that kid, that made a difference. And the reason I could do that is because that's what Alan taught me. Okay, so that's just, again, part of his legacy going forward. One of the very first PACS systems was for ultrasound, and PACS is everything's electronic now. We spend our lives in front of screens, and this is one of the first. And so this is one of the first things by one of the ultrasound companies. And I have no idea what's going on in this picture. I really do not. I don't know. I don't know the background. It was just in the departmental archives. But when I saw this, it's the shirt. Yes, the bow tie. Because what you could do on this system is you could change the background. When you weren't displaying a patient study, you could change the background wallpaper to anything you wanted it to be. And so when I was on my fellowship year, 94, 95, when Alan and I were on ultrasound together, he would spend the first 5 to 10 minutes of the morning changing the background to match whatever he was wearing. He would change it to match his shirt. And I swear I remember this shirt. I really do. But that was every day. If he was on ultrasound, he would change the background to match the shirt he was wearing, which was usually checked. Okay. So that's what I thought when I saw that. I have no idea what abuse is going on with this trainee here. So, and of course, bow ties. Bow ties were his thing. That was a trademark. Rarely seen without one. Comic books. I had no idea till recently, and I found these in his desk drawer. I have no idea their significance. I did look them up. They're not super valuable, $20, but I don't know the topic or if it filled in a gap in his collection, because you've already heard once he started collecting something, we're going to collect something. So, but it just sort of cracks me up. It's like, who knew? Who knew? That was Alan. Moxie, of course, Moxie. Most of us didn't understand what was this thing. And this was actually, and I forgot to bring one of his standard slides. Moxie was actually part of the theme. People have theme slides, decorations. A Moxie bottle was part of his theme slide. Every lecture slide had a thing of Moxie on it. So of course, one had to find Moxie for, the celebration here. And so I do recommend it. It's not terrible. It's fine. It's root beerish, but again, that was just a thing for Alan. That was again, when you thought of him, this was one of those things. The Christmas cards, okay? So it's like, oh dear. I mean, the custom Christmas card, okay? Every year, very clever. They do it themselves. And if it was a Christmas card, that also meant it was getting close to the department holiday party. And this is the oldest one I could find. I got here in 2011, back as a chief. And Elizabeth and I always have it at our house. And it's anybody can come. It's a nice event. I think it's a nice event. Alan, I'm going to say 10 years out of 12, he's the first guy there. He's the first one there. And so hand him a glass of champagne or a white wine, and he would wander and he'd look at my books like I look at his books, and he'd hang out and he'd introduce a few guests, and he'd probably be gone in an hour, but guaranteed Alan was going to be our first guest showing up. And so I'm going to miss that this year. And one of the years we actually had our earlier party was actually on his birthday, December 4th. And so we got a little champagne and sang happy birthday to him. And it might have been his 75th. I can't remember. But anyway, so that was when I get the card, I know Alan's going to be coming. And here's his office. Here's his office as it looks earlier this week. So 43 years of service, emeritus. And you'll notice this funny thing about the Grant Coors Ranch. It took me a long time to figure out, why is that there? And again, he's a private man. But Mike's sitting here in the front, and that's where Mike works. And so Alan was very much proud of his of Mike's environmental and historical preservation work. It was very important to Alan. And it also took me a while to figure out where all these magazines came from that were on the front table as you walk into the office suite area. And all of these are related to the kind of work that Mike does. And so he would put them out there and people would flip through them from time to time. Not your typical radiology department reading material. But again, I think just a reflection of what was important to Alan and the pride that he had in his family and the work that they were doing. So this is getting this. I think this is my last slide, and so this is our. Oh no, it's not. Sorry, this is our hallway, and it's got this industrial look, and I'm sure it was on purpose, and I'm sure it's also cheaper than putting in a drop ceiling. So, but this is the hallway, and I'm sure that it drove Alan crazy. Like many office buildings, you cannot turn off any of these lights. You cannot turn them off. They burn 24/7. And so my office is just to the right. If you take a right for where I'm standing, you hit my office. And I came in one Monday, and this Post-it note was on my door. And so one, this is great. Two, he wrote twice. So I don't know, as we'll talk about, he often was there Saturday mornings, but he came back and added the please turn off later, which I think is just sort of, and I walked in, I was initially a little miffed, but I walked in and, you know, my lights are on. It was just kind of like, okay, fair. Yeah. So again, very important for him, you know, conservation, saving energy, whatnot. So I still have the sticky note. This is Alan's office. Yes, Tamar, we have work to do. Yes. You may put your head in your hands. Yes. Oh my goodness, it's a busy place. And it's always looked like this. One thing I do like is if you look at that in the box there, even though he since the pandemic, it was very difficult for him to get out, and he had less contact with our fellows and our trainees, but he always had the latest pictures of who the current trainees were. Even if he wasn't working with them, he wanted to know who they were. And so he always had the up-to-date list of who there was. And I think that again says something a little bit about Alan. This is the wall that Alan would look at. And so there's all kinds of awards and, you know, the usual things that one collects over a very long life. But a couple I think were particularly important, especially because they're right in the middle. And Dr. Lovell is up here, who was our chief of rheumatology for a very long time. And I think, you know, this is a central place for Alan. And so he did a lot of teaching rheumatologists. And so that, you know, that award, that recognition was very important to him. And again, I think a recognition of his teaching, and it doesn't matter who, anyone who wanted to learn, he was willing to teach you. And of course, also right next to that is a picture of his longtime friend, Lionel. So those are the things that Alan could look at the most sitting at his desk, and it meant something to him. He likes books. Boy, does he like books. And so Alan and I share a fondness for books and about history. And so I have, you know, we are both collectors / hoarders. It's a subtle distinction sometimes. So, but he loved his books and the variety on his shelf. And this is in his office at work. You have the expected, you know, medical books in assorted languages. You have your Hungarian to English dictionary because one does, right? You have that. He's also got some little library. The Cameron is in his office. Sons and Lovers by D.H. Lawrence is in office. There's assorted, I'm not sure what the filing system is. I'm sure it made sense to him, but it is an interesting assortment of things. And an interesting story about that is, so when I was up in Columbus, and I was collecting my sort of, you know, older books, and, you know, the internet is a wonderful thing, and you can pursue that hobby late at night when the kids are in bed. And I found this guy, this seller on eBay, and he got some really interesting things. And I bought a couple of volumes, and I saw, oh, they're coming from Cincinnati. And then I think about the fourth book, it was Alan that figured, I was like, I'm buying books from Alan, okay? And so I'm buying books for from Dr. Oestreich. So the next one I bought from him, he inscribed it to me before he sent it. So that was kind of funny. So yeah, so even before I came back, I maintained my connection through PayPal, at least, and eBay with Dr. Oestrich. He loved the journal. He loved pediatric radiology, the journal. He loved the continuing medical activity. So I just pulled a random thing off his shelf, and I was not disappointed. Most of us do CME activities. You just read it. It's like, I'm just going to do this quickly and get my CME and move on. But no, we've got underlining, X's, what do we think is correct? Alan read these really, really carefully, and I'm going to blow up the bottom here. So I was an assistant editor for this journal for 13 years, and we rotated the responsibility. Who's doing the CME activity? And it was always a last minute. It's like, oh crap, it's my turn. Okay, do it. Get this thing done. Get the questions. Let's just say that Alan was a stickler for detail, and so every time the journal came out, there was always this pause amongst Peter and at the time Cindy, Don Frush before that. It's like, okay, has Alan written in yet? Because he would find the mistake. He would, or the not exactly precisely worded thing, and I'd get an email, and the office get an email, and really regrettably, he was almost always right, and so it was sort of anxiety-provoking, moments to put these out there, because knowing Alan was going to be reading these really, really carefully, so I was not disappointed to see this marked up. Really, it's like, oh yeah, that was a year I was the assistant editor. I just pulled it off the shelf, and there it was. So another memory for me for Alan. Alan didn't like crosswalks. This is Burnett Avenue. Burnett Avenue is busy. It's busy. And Alan's parking spot was in the garage he's heading to. The office building we're in, I park 100 feet from my office. It's like, Alan, let me get you a spot here. It doesn't rain on you then. It's like, nope, that was his spot. But Alan would play Frogger all the time. In the pitch black, it doesn't raining, he's going to do that. And my office windows look over here, and I'm at my desk. Anytime I hear a tire screech or a horn, it's just like, oh man, please. And so one of Sally's memories of Alan doing this too. And while this is not entirely his fault, the grounds crew tried to prevent this by planting knockout roses along here, because it's thorns. People want to walk. No, this will not deter. This will not deter the determined jaywalker. And you have to understand, the extension to actually use the crosswalk, it's about another 200 feet to your journey. It's not a big deal, but oh my gosh, every time, just it doesn't matter, day or night, no matter the traffic, right across Burnett Avenue. So this is going to be my last slide. And so Alan and I do it much less often, but I would come in the office sometimes pretty early on Saturday mornings. It's quiet, it's peaceful, get some stuff done. And I usually, for such an event like this, I would usually dress up a little better, but this is what Alan always wears on a Saturday. So you got to wear 501 jeans. He always wore 501s. And he rolled up the cuff. Roll up the cuff. Shirt probably buttoned down, very likely plaid. Very likely plaid. Got to have a cardigan. Got to have a cardigan. And you got to have sensible walking shoes, because you need good footing crossing Burnett Avenue, dodging cars. So this is my homage to Alan. So coming to the office on Saturdays, again, this is my view down the hall, okay? And radiologists in the crowd can chime in or not. But every time I look down the hall, I'd come in. And so I'm going to ask, what's the difference between those two pictures? I'll give that a moment. It's like Highlights magazine. What's the difference between the two of these? There's that little bit of light. See a little bit of light there in the hallway? That's Alan's office. So I'd come in, and I would look down the hall, and I'd see the light. I'd say, all right, Alan's here. So I'd go to my office, and I would say probably 25% of the time when he'd leave, I hear the door close, and then I hear the outer door close, and wouldn't say anything. About 25% of the time, it would be he'd walk by and he'd say, "Bye, Brian. Have a good weekend." I'd say, "Bye, Alan." We didn't see each other and just, go. About half the time, he'd stop by at some point. And he would never more than 5 minutes, never more than 5 minutes. And we would talk about book or some particularly egregious political thing that was driving him crazy, or some other thing that was on his mind, occasionally a little bit of philosophy. They were very short conversations. But again, I know he's a very private man, but it was very special to me because he was sharing, that time with me. And again, very short period of time. But I really look forward to that. That made going to the office Saturdays kind of fun. And I will tell you, Tamar, every time I walk in these days, I look down the hall and I don't see the little light. And that's, I miss that. And I'm going to miss that because that's what I would look for every time I walk in the door. those are my comments about Alan. A fascinating man. You never really know. You never really know all about what your colleagues are about because they have a lot of lives and a lot of experiences that you never know about that have gone to shape them and make them who they are. And seeing all these, all the impact that he's had on all your lives and all the kids that he's taken care of over the years and all the people he's trained to take care of kids.